human civilization based on the principles Atato Brahma Jigyasa. A whole society dedicated to understanding the real purpose of human existence. And it's possible for such a society to exist. But the first thing that has to change is the wrong ideas about who we are and where we are. We are eternal souls, spirit souls, servants of Krishna in a universe manifested by Krishna. So if people understood that, then they would try to organize society in such a way that most human energy could be devoted to developing the resource of consciousness, to elevate consciousness stage by stage until its ultimate perfection, Krishna consciousness. And as far as the material necessities of life are concerned, there's no need to divide ourselves into competing groups to fight over material resources. We should cooperatively try to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible, while putting most of our human energy into developing that resource of consciousness. So this is part of the reason why, Srila Prabhupada wanted, the Temple of Vedic Planetarium constructed, to draw attention of people on a worldwide basis to the wrong ideas that are currently misguiding and misleading them, and drawing their attention to the correct ideas that can give proper guidance to humans and all living things. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any question, comment? Yes, Mahatma Prabhu. There's a microphone.
When you were mentioning about how leaders are destroying the world ecologically and in other ways, we have a situation in which many people who come to Krishna consciousness already have careers within companies that are also destructive, or companies whose values are different than ours. And you also have people who are now coming to Krishna consciousness, who are in university being trained to likely end up working for a company whose values are different. So how does someone deal with that? Let's say you're an accountant and the only job you can get is with Monsanto. What do? And you need to work to support yourself. Or you're a chemical engineer and your job is to create pesticides and other polluting elements. What does one do in that situation?
Well, one can, as I was saying, society as it's currently organized is full of situations like that. So one can, first of all, at least in terms of one's own internal convictions, try to understand what the real situation is. And as far as what one should do, that's different in each case. In the past, we've noticed people have sometimes given up their positions to take some other position in society that Doesn't happen in every case, but in some cases it can. People can change their occupations, they can, and sometimes that requires some sacrifice. It may not always be possible, so then one can give some of the fruits of one's work to a society like the International Society for Krishna Consciousness that is trying to establish proper values in human society, and ultimately, one can also try socially to introduce these values in one's workplace, whatever it happens to be. Not necessarily by direct preaching, but if you're invited, would you like to go out for a drink? Oh, sorry, I don't drink. Would you like to do this or that? Sorry, I don't do. And gradually people begin to wonder, well, why? And then you can explain why. And then if one is, so that's one step one can take. And then sometimes one can take a more active role in trying to change the institution or organization that one belongs to. And we actually see that in the world today, there are corporations where the leaders in the corporate culture is trying to become more socially responsible or environmentally responsible or aware. So if one happens to be working for a corporation or institution like that, one might try to participate in that aspect of things. But there are ethical dilemmas that confront devotees who find themselves in these kinds of situations, but there's not, just one way to deal with them. Seems like you've thought a little bit about this. Do you have anything to add that?
Hare Krishna. Your answer is very good. I was thinking another option could be one simplifies their life to a point in which they have more freedom to choose where they work, so they're not so dependent on a certain salary, because that's a consideration. You have a certain overhead. If you're living on a certain standard, you don't have so many choices. So that can be a consideration. Of course, for many men who aren't married, consideration is when they consider all these things, sometimes they become brahmacharis. I just think, it's a compromise, and I'll be compromised my entire life. And the reason I asked that question is there's a deeper reason behind it, and the reason is do we see in the future at some point that we as a society are going to have to live everything we teach? Because in many ways we don't live what we teach. We're working for a company that's polluting the world. We're using all this technology, not necessarily for Krishna consciousness, but for our enjoyment, and there's a dichotomy there. So that's also kind of where that question comes from, because when I meet people and they say, well, I work for this, I've got a chemical engineering degree, and they're very excited about their new job, and I'm thinking, don't you realize this is so contradictory to everything that Prabhupada wanted to do? So how do you see it in the future? Do you think that our society should or will come to that point where we're totally aligned, or is it because we're in a compromised position that may never happen? Or are we meant to all go back to village life, farm life, and eventually get away from this at some point and not be part of it?
Well, it's a gradual process. You have to think what the ideal situation would be. You know, the ideal situation would be a world led by Vaishnava Rajarshis like Yudhisthira and people of that caliber, Maharaj Parikshit and others, guided by Vaishnava Brahmanas, and organizing a whole society economically, politically, socially, culturally on Vedic principles. That would obviously be the ideal situation, where all engagement there'd be proper engagement for everyone who wanted to make spiritual progress in life and still take care of their material needs. I mean, that would obviously be the ideal situation. We're not in the ideal situation now. So one solution that Srila Prabhupada appeared to envision is founding a society that people could join. And that's not an option for everybody. Not everybody can renounce their position in the material world. So he recognized that people could keep their positions, and so there is that intermediate stage. But it would seem the best thing would be, if possible, to try to increase our own facilities and offer more and more engagement to people within our communities, and offer them the opportunity to form their own companies that are based on, and we see that happening, people who have that type of propensity, they can create their own companies, offer employment to devotees. And as far as the world goes, some may have to be in a more compromised position, but they could be, as you were suggesting, looking to simplify their lives so they can change their position, or, as I was suggesting, working within their institutions and companies to try to make them more spiritual in some way. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai.